In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to create a simulation where snow falls on the side of a cabin. So just to really quickly look at the nodes that I have, my cabin, the source particles, the ground plane, and then the Autodot network. Starting our new simulation, kind of starting with a new file, we need to first create a ground plane so we can have a static object that the snow falls on. And so I'm just going to click ground plane up in the top shelf tool. The ground plane, as you can see, already creates that Autodot network, which is great because we're going to be needing to create more static objects that the snow interacts with and doesn't go through. So now that we have that ground plane, I'm actually going to create the particle emitter that we need. So how I want to create this particle emitter is I'm actually just going to create a box and then model it out so it's about the size of the ground plane, so it kind of covers the whole ground plane, because once we hit source particles for this object, it's going to scatter the particles throughout that object so that they can be emitted evenly throughout that object, and I want it to cover that whole entire area of the ground plane. So I'm really making this big, but if you need your simulation to be smaller, definitely you can make your emitter smaller or want them only to be emitted in a certain area, that too. From there, I'm going to select the box, make sure the box is selected, and then I'm going to hit under particles, although there's other effects that we can use I'm showing. I'm going to hit source particles, and like I said, that's going to scatter particles throughout the object I just created and then become an emitter. So when we start the simulation, you can see that they just kind of pour out, and they're not behaving anywhere near snow or what we want to be snow. So I'm going to have to go into a little bit of editing with that. And as you can see, just coming back up into the object layer, this has created a source particles node as well as added stuff to our Autodot network. So it's added a box source and then a pop object as well. So going into these two nodes, these are two of the nodes that are going to be where you'll be editing kind of the particles that are emitting and kind of adjusting the different parameters within. So you can see that this is sourced from the box object that we just created. The first thing I'm going to adjust is the birth rate, and that's just because there are way too many particles. I didn't need that many for snow, so I just lowered the birth rate down to 500, and then I also wanted to adjust the life expectancy. So for this simulation, I kind of went for a flurry type simulation, so not really heavy snow that's sticking that much, but kind of flurries that are sticking and then melting. So after the flurries hit the ground, they kind of stay for a little while. They don't really accumulate that much, although they can kind of pile up, but they kind of melt after a little while. So then the next thing I did was I went into the physical tab of the pop object, and this is where I can adjust how they interact with the ground plane. So at first you saw that they were bouncing. Definitely don't need that in snow. Snow doesn't bounce. So I eliminated the bounce all the way down to 0, and then you can see that they don't bounce, but they do kind of move around like ants when they hit the ground, and that's because they're kind of sliding around. So I moved the friction all the way up to 1, so we have just kind of, once it hits the ground, it hits and sticks and doesn't move, which definitely looks a lot more like snow. A couple more things that I wanted to edit, since the particles are moving super, super fast and still are kind of going at a much higher rate than snow would. It needs to be kind of lighter and fluffier. So I put in a pop drag, which gives it the particles air resistance. So it slows down the particles. This kind of looks a lot more like they're floating. I actually thought this was a little bit too slow, so I went up to the air resistance and actually only put it down to 0.5. So once it's at 0.5, I felt like that was more appropriate for what snow falling would look like, kind of in between. So that can be adjusted as well, depending on how hard it's snowing. If you want it to snow a little harder or have any type of velocity on it, you can do that with the pop drag node as well. And the next thing that I'm going to be using is pop wind, and this is really what makes it look like snow. All of these parameters can help randomize the direction that the snow is falling and kind of the swirling of the wind, as well as like the roughness throughout the entire simulation. So I actually messed around with these parameters a little bit and found which ones that I thought looked best. So just throughout those, you can look through them and see what exactly they do edit. Just kind of by messing around with the values, you can see how they affect the snow simulation. But after I put in all those parameters, I got something like this, and it actually looks really, really good. I thought it looked just like snow falling kind of gently, little flurries here and there. But then again, I did think that there was still too many particles being emitted. I wanted a little bit less, some more flurry, not heavy snowfall. So I just went back into the back source and put the birth rate down to 300. All right, so now that we've created pretty much the entire snow simulation, we do need to create a cabin. And so, like I said, you can import any type of object or cabin into your file and then make it a static object, but I actually went ahead and just modeled a really basic cabin just because I felt like modeling something. So this is what it turned out with, just two very, very basic boxes that I turned into somewhat of a cabin. One was the roof and one was the base of the box. And so as you can see, when I run this animation, it goes straight through the house, doesn't interact with the house at all, and we want it to sit on top and kind of fall on the side of the cabin. So what I need to do is go up to the static object shelf tool under rigid bodies, and that will create both the house and the roof to be static objects. So just selecting those objects and then selecting static object, it brings them into the static solver and then creates static objects, and therefore we should have some interaction now with the snow and the cabin. And as you can see, as I run this, the snow does fall on the side of the cabin, kind of builds up a little bit on the top, and is interacting with the cabin, isn't going straight through, which is really, really nice. You can go in and adjust the color more and more of the material, put a snow shader on it, and then you'd be good to go. Thanks for watching.